and it delayed me getting back here. So
we're live, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, that's been noted, Sue. Anticipated apologies have been given, so appreciate that, Councillor Holsworth. Thank you. Right. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Place Scrutiny Board, the 19th of October 2023. We've only got one major item on the agenda this evening, which is the winter gritting report. But before we do, we'll go through the agenda. We've got substitutes. Councillor Lee, I know is one who will be arriving in due course. He's got some logistical problems and has sent apologies in advance of that. Do we have any other substitutions or apologies for absence?
We do, Chair. We have Councillor Blackburrow is substituting for Councillor Atkinson. Councillor Kearney is substituting for Councillor Clark, but Councillor Kearney's not turned up yet.
That's fine.
And obviously Councillor Lee for Councillor Caffrey. We have had apologies from Councillor Clark, Caffrey and Atkinson.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Holsworth, was Councillor Kearney in the same meeting with you?
No, Chair. It was
Right,
just
okay.
myself, Councillor Scullion and Councillor Lee and
Right,
Councillor Wilson.
No, I was just wondering if we might be cutting him the same sort of slack as for Councillor Lee, but it doesn't matter. If he arrives, that'd be great. Right, brilliant. So admission of the public. Well, we're live on YouTube. And onto the members' interests. This is my duty to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest.
Kearney is here, Chair.
I beg your pardon?
Councillor Kearney has arrived. Just letting him in.
Thank you. We'll greet him before I continue. Good evening, Councillor Kelly. You've not missed anything. I'm just going through the first part of the agenda, so nothing critical has happened yet.
Right, thanks. I came down the town and get soaked in the showers.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Lee is also here.
And
I didn't realise it was on
okay.
Zoom.
Right, I think in that case we're all together, aren't we? We'll just wait for Councillor Lee to sign in and okay. Great stuff. We're there. Good evening, Councillor Lee. You've not missed anything. We had a late start waiting for a couple of other people, so I'm just at the very beginning of the agenda, to be quite honest with you. So
thank you so much.
I'll continue, and it's yeah, good to see you. Thank you very much for standing in. Same as with Councillor Blackburrow as well, and also Councillor Kearney. Welcome to you all. Yes, disclosable pecuniary interest. It's my duty to ask you to either declare now or in the fullness of time where it becomes relevant to disclose any relevant interest that may pertain to this. Item 4 on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of September to be agreed as a correct record and signed by myself in due course. Do we have anyone to propose those? Any comments? Sorry, hang on, before I propose those, do we have any comments or issues with those minutes? Is everyone content with those? Do we have someone who might be able to propose them? Thank you, Councillor Brundle. Anyone to second? Thank you, Councillor Holsworth. All those in favour? Yep. None against. Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. That's passed as a true and accurate record of that particular meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Item 5, deputations. We don't have any, so I'll skip the blurb on that one and we'll proceed onwards. I'd like to welcome sorry, just bear with me. Have I gone on to a second page? Yes, Jonathan Cole and oh, for goodness sake, where's everyone gone? Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
Adrian Gill, Chair.
Yes, thank you so much. He's right next to him on my screen. I can't believe it. I'm face blind tonight. I do apologise to both of you. I'm so sorry, but welcome to you both. Some days are better than others, I guess. Right, yes, for the winter service and gritting, how we prepare and provide the service, and with the Assistant Director of Strategic Infrastructure. Thank you very much indeed. I'm so sorry for that. I'm better than this most days, honestly. Which of you will be covering the presentation, please?
I think that'll be a little bit of a double act, Chair. I'll start and then hand over to Jonathan for a little bit of the detail. I think we'll probably try and get through the presentation, covering the pertinent points, as succinctly as we can to allow, plenty of time for sort of questions and discussion. I have a quick question which I should have checked in beforehand, but will someone be sharing the presentation on screen?
I will see if I can share it, Chair, if you just bear with me a moment.
Thank you.
Apologies, I probably could, but I'm less familiar with Zoom these days than
Is that sharing? Can anybody see it?
Not yet.
Oh. Why not?
It looks like something's happening.
Something's coming.
It looks right on my screen. Can anybody else see it?
Yep, I can see something. Yep, I think
got
we're
that
good to
now.
go.
Is it possible to make that full screen?
Oh, let's have a look.
Click on slideshow, Diane, at the top.
I found it. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, got it.
And then from the beginning.
There we go. Thank you.
Brilliant. So, good evening, everyone. As the Chair's introduced me, I'm Adrian Gill, Assistant Director for Strategic Infrastructure. So my service is responsible for the winter service policy. I'm joined by Jonathan Cole this evening, Corporate Lead for Green Space and Street Scene, because his service effectively implements the policy, and Jonathan that's why Jonathan will talk us through the detail in terms of how we forecast, how we prepare and plan for delivering the service, and obviously how we set about it in terms of implementing that as required. I've just realised I can't control the slides now. Could we go to the next slide, please? So the Highways Act places a duty on the council to provide a safe and well-managed resilient network. That includes reference to snow and icy conditions, providing, as far as is reasonably practicable, a safe passage along the highway is not endangered by snow and ice. And that leads us to the need to have a winter service policy and a winter service plan. Through that policy, we prioritise high-use roads, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in due course. We also prioritise access to community facilities such as hospitals, schools and shopping centres. And underpinning that, we will always prioritise requests from the blue light services if they need or require access to a certain area, and we will divert resources to facilitate that. Next slide, please. So clearly, we cannot grit the entire network, and we have a policy decision chart, which you can see on screen and is available online, which informs when looking at requests for gritting on new roads, how we prioritise or categorise that road in terms of the winter service. At the moment, we currently grit about 600 kilometres of the network, which is roughly about half the network. And this has previously been reviewed in line with well-managed highway infrastructure code of best practice. So Jonathan will talk us through it in a little bit more detail now, but we're very confident we have a robust policy and a robust plan and procedures for implementing that policy. We do get a lot of requests around gritting, and again, I'm sure that will come up in the discussion, but we have this decision matrix here, this policy chart here, which helps us explain to people how we would categorize their road or their bit of the network in terms of providing that service. And this really underpins everything we do in terms of providing the service. But I'll now, if we go to the next slide, hand over to Jonathan to talk in a little bit more detail about how that applies to Calderdale, and then I'll come back at the end perhaps just to touch on some of the challenges and some of the things that we're considering moving forwards in terms of the service.
I included this slide, so I think it's a really good way of visualizing what Calderdale actually looks like if you consider it as rather than just a up and down the valley to Todmorden, etc. It shows that actually Calderdale has small areas of low-lying land in the valley bottoms, but actually the majority of Calderdale is actually at relative high elevations. And you'll notice that actually we don't see much of the red on the plan. So therefore we actually have these really steep-sided valleys that go very quickly from low-lying ground to very high-lying ground. Just to put it in context, somewhere like Illingworth is at around 1,000 foot above sea level. Pretty high up really in the grand scheme of things when you look at the range in Calderdale. Next slide, please. So yes, Calderdale split into 22 precautionary salting routes. Exact mileage is 620 kilometres of roads that are gritted. We hold 12,000 tonne of rock salt in the saltback barn at Ellen Depot. We manage the stock during the season, and we will procure in during the winter as needed to keep the stock levels at a functioning level so that we're always got good supply in case of inclement weather. Currently have an existing budget of £1.4 million for the service, and we have a council's own weather station, and that's up at Peckett Well. And the image on the right hand side is a picture taken from that weather station that we get live streaming from, that shows it on a rather nice day, but just gives you an indication of where it is, and that is used as part of our decision-making platform. Next slide, please. I thought I actually used this slide a few years ago when I was talking to a group of officers on a national course. But I think it's actually really relevant to understand that actually we grit a really wide range of road in Calderdale. We don't just concentrate on our main roads, the ones on the left-hand side like Ellen Bypass, or our cross-Pennine routes, sort of like Craig Road, but we actually, get into the hearts of the community. The road on the left-hand side is Booth at above Ludden there, and obviously people recognise Heptonstall on the right-hand side, going up towards Heptonstall School. Next slide, please. The service runs from the 1st of October to the 1st of May, 7 months of the year. And for the other 5 months of the year, we get back on with planning, preparing for the following season. So winter actually runs for us all year round, but actually our operational period is for 7 months. Staffing wise, there's 10 members of staff on top of their day jobs take roles in this service. 4 operators, decision makers, and 6 operator supervisors. And these people are always working in a pair so that we've always got coverage for 24 hours a day and allowing adequate rest time for staff and things. And provision of all the vehicles and drivers to deliver this is delivered through 12 local SMEs, all based within the Calderdale area. Next slide, please. So the fleet that we use for gritting is made up of a real mixture of different types of vehicles. This is partly to get real good efficiencies on some of the big routes, but also smaller vehicles to allow us to actually really penetrate into some of the areas where we grit in Calderdale. So you'll see on the slide there's different mixture of different types of vehicles. An example on the right hand side is one of the tractor trailer gritters operating by one of our local agricultural contractors out on a route after a snow session. Next slide, please. We also have some additional plant that's available to the council. We hold this on retainer. We always have 2 gritters available 24/7 to provide additional response to emergency services incidents, but also in case of a breakdown on a route, if a contractor can't self cover that, we've got the resources to get straight in there and get the routes dealt with and gritted. We also have contracts with 17 farmers for snowplows and have access to self-propelled snowblowers and tractor-mounted snowblowers for those extreme conditions when we get the severe drifting that everybody will have experienced in the past. Next slide, please. So what do we do prior to the winter? And I think this comes to what we've mostly been asked to come here this evening for is, are we prepared and are we ready for the winter? And the answer is yes, and we have to do a lot of stuff during the summertime. So the weather station that says at Peckett Well belongs to the council, is serviced by a company called Vaisala. As part of that service, the weather station is also calibrated to make sure that actually the readings are coming back are accurate. Any contracts that are needed are reviewed. And this year, for example, we've re-tendered both our weather station contract and our road forecasting contract. All contractors' vehicles and paperwork that's needed is checked. And we have a pre-season full team meeting where all staff involved come together. We talk through the season and work out any issues. And this involves with some of our colleagues in business support who support us around billing and things like that, because it's really important from keeping it on top of how much things are costing, is having that team really involved. And actually, we then plan and carry out a pre-season gritting run. That normally occurs in the last week of October, and where we actually go around and we will actually, the contractors will come in and have a driver and a mate on each of the vehicles. The routes will all get driven and we'll pick up any problems, so parked vehicles, overhanging vegetation, changes to road layouts that have occurred that we've not been made aware of, or just other factors, building works, things like that, that affect the ability to do that. Also, as part of this, we'll pick up areas where maybe there are Yorkshire water leaks or water running out the hillsides that need some attention to try to reduce icing issues. Next slide, please. I thought I'd touch a little bit on route hierarchy. So pretty much every day of the year, unless we get into some severe weather, we operate our precautionary salt network at 620 kilometres. If conditions start to get severe, we have a sort of step back process that we use. 22 routes at the top. We then do a step back down to what we call our primary route network, and that's about 500 kilometres. And then we have what's called a resilient network that is only 10% of the Calderdale network, approximately 100 kilometres long. And this is servicing things like the hospital, fire stations, ambulance stations, police stations, major centres of the population. It's designed so that actually a gritter can go out and back in an hour. And this is when we're in those severe conditions where we need to really prioritise emergency services access, and actually we need to accept that actually we can't battle nature, and sometimes you've got to say actually we need to concentrate on what is really important for public services and then follow out. What we will do is that once conditions improve, we will then start stepping back out automatically and start working our way back out, eventually getting all 620 kilometres cleared and treated and gritted. Next slide, please. Before we just talk about a little bit about how we decide what we do, I think some people wonder sometimes, do I just stick my head out the front door and see what the weather's doing? But actually there's a lot of science behind it. All our decision makers have studied detail, have been on courses, are qualified to do what we do. It's a full 5-day residential course to be a decision maker. We study all the information that comes in from the forecasts. We can study all the information that comes in from our own weather stations. And then we actually have an agreed matrix that we use. So the decision that's made every day of the year is made on the same standard matrix. And therefore, if we ever are challenged in court, we can show exactly why we've done what we've done and why we did it. The first decision maker on call makes the decision, and the second decision maker on call actually checks that decision and agrees that it is the appropriate form of action. Supervisors then contact the contractors and arrange the action and record everything that goes on. And we just keep rinsing and repeating this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the whole of the 7-month period of the season. Next slide, please. I thought I'd just touch on salt bins and piles. It's one I know as ward councillors you get quite a lot of correspondence about. We have a contract set up that's going to go out start of November, and we'll go around every salt bin in Calderdale. We'll check it, we'll clean it, replace it if it's damaged beyond use, and make sure they're all full of salt. We also have some salt piles out in rural areas, and these are always completed prior to the Christmas break. But the timing of when we actually exactly done this is based on the weather forecast, because they are very susceptible to wash off in some of the areas. We do a lot of monitoring of salt bins and piles, and for economic efficiency, we do full refills, and we'll time this when we're starting to see that actually there's a need for a mass refill of the network. And if any requests come in for new bins, we have a agreed standard scoring matrix. We'll score those and we'll share the results with the customer. If it scores the required amount of points, it will get a new salt bin. If it doesn't, we will advise them that it doesn't meet that fact. And if we need to, we can send and share the reason why not. Next slide, please. And this, I'll hand back to Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So I think before we perhaps get into questions and discussions, it's worth touching on perhaps some of the financial challenges of delivering the winter service. So I think Jonathan's already mentioned that we have a budget allocation of 1.4 million. When we look at the last 5 years, that's probably the average cost of delivering the service. But when we uprate that to today's costs in terms of inflation, it's probably the last 5 year rolling average is about 1.5, 1.6 million. So in any given year, that's the range that we perhaps expect to see. But clearly, because it's so dependent on a variable such as weather, the range of costs in a given year can be quite dramatic. So the policy sets the activity that Jonathan's just set out. The cost of delivering that activity is dependent on, or has increased, should I say, with inflation, which particularly affects the fuel costs and the labour costs of delivering the service. But ultimately, what dictates the cost is the weather, because that will depend how often we go out. So this is what we call a sort of uncontrolled budget line, because we can't curtail the service without changing the policy. So the policy is set, that dictates what we do, but the weather dictates on the cost. So it's quite a challenge to manage this line, and it's obviously something we keep a very close eye on. We have now got the salt barn at Ainley Top, which was a great investment by the council, and what that allows us to do is that allows us to, one, there is less wastage of salt in terms of storage, because storing salt in dry conditions means there's less wastage. Secondly, it allows us to be more efficient with how much salt we spread, because spreading dry salt allows us to spread less than spreading damp salt. So that's been a great investment for the council, and we are seeing savings of that. Against that, unfortunately, alongside that, because of the inflation increases we've seen against plant, fuel and labour, that has more than cancelled out any savings that we've made. Doesn't mean to, clearly that doesn't mean to say that wasn't the wrong thing to do. It was the right thing to do. But unfortunately, we're still in a position where there is a lot of pressure on this service. We have a contract in place, as Jonathan said, to deliver the service. We've extended that by another year. That's linked to inflation. That's got a CPI linked clause. What we want to do in the near future is re-tender this service, and at the same time refresh the policy, and therefore bring forward choices for the council in terms of what we would like to get out of the service and prioritise, which I think will be some of the things that will come out in discussion now. But clearly, delivering additional services will require additional funding unless something else gives. And I'll leave it there, and I think that probably does bring us to the sort of questions and discussions that anyone may have. So I suspect we can stop sharing the presentation now, if that's possible. And
gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for your presentation. Members, if you would be so kind as to use the raise hand facility if you wish to ask a question or make a point, I'd be grateful because it then stacks you up in order. So yeah, straight off the bat, Councillor Lee and then Councillor Blackburn. Thank you. Councillor Lee first.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Adrian and Jonathan. Thank you for an excellent presentation. I do have a few queries to ask you. It's not about what we plan to do before it starts snowing. It's what we plan to do when it does start snowing that concerns me. And I take it you're aware that there was some controversy about this salt barn and the change of use that it involved throughout Calderdale if it went ahead some years ago. But I've just been looking at the papers where those justifications were made. And at that time, it was considered that a bad year meant that we would use 18,000 tonnes of salt. At that time, the average usage was 12,000 tonnes a year. So at the start of the year, it had been policy that we would hold 18,000 tonnes of salt, just in case it was a bad year. I noticed that now we've got the salt barn, which is in itself a good move, and Adrian's comments are well made. It's clean salt, it's protected from the weather and all of that, but it holds 12,000 tonnes. So the start parameter at the start of winter has reduced from what was considered to be the safe level, which included all weather conditions, of 18,000 tonnes, and it's now become 12,000 tonnes. So I presume that you're well aware of that. And so I'm interested to hear how we can be confident that if it's a bad year, we've got enough salt at the start of the year to prevent any problems arising from running out of salt, which might sound a bit dramatic, but I'll give you an example. And again, I assume that you know this, but in the 5 years leading up to 2018, the usage of salt each year went as follows. It's quite interesting. So 2014, I'll say, we used 6,000 tonnes. 15, 13,000 tonnes. 16, 12,600 tonnes. 17, 11,200. And wait for it, in 2018, 31,000 tonnes. There's a huge disparity between the average and the lows and the highs. And what we need to be satisfied with is that we're catering for most eventualities. But what I think is of additional concern about what a high can be, and we know it can be over 30,000 tonnes, is at the moment we're experiencing all sorts of extreme weather all over the world with fire, floods, you name it, extreme weather. So what I'm concerned about, if we get a bad winter, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to be Calderdale that's frozen up for the duration, or are we making wishful thinking type decisions by lowering the start position from 18,000, which apparently served us quite well in the past, down to 16? So you're reducing the capacity at the start of the year by a third. So I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about that. Thank you, Jonathan and Adrian.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll take this one if you want, as I've been around long enough to remember the winters. At the time of that report, when we go back to that period of time, that was the point where the council actually had 2 salting depots. It had Stanley Depot at Halifax and Ainley Depot at Elland. Both were outdoor stored salt and both held 9,000 tonne of salt at the start of the season. So that's where you get your 18,000 tonne from. One of the significant savings that we see we're using salt barn is that we're allowed, when you have salt that's stored outside, you can't spread anything less than 15 grams a square metre. When we use in quite a few, up to about -2, -3, we're allowed to spread it 10 grams a square metre. And that's actually a 50% saving in usage. So what would be 120 tonnes going out of a depot at night time is only 80 tonnes at depot going out at night time. So there's some changes that have occurred in the time that give some confidence. But also, we very actively, so the platform that we use for making our decision making also has all our salt management built into it. So I can see it, I can actually log on now and I can tell you exactly to the point of a ton what's actually in that salt barn at this time, exactly this time. And what we do is we constantly monitor that. And as soon as we start using it, we start reordering salt. So last winter, we actually ordered 6,000 tonnes of salt during the winter in either 1,000 or 2,000 tonne chunks. So if we run up to Christmas and I've used, if I'm getting down at Christmas time and I'm down to 9,000 tonne of salt, I will have 2,000 tonne of salt on order for January to come in January, and they normally deliver that in about 4 or 5 days. And we constantly monitor that during the winter season. It's only when we get to beyond Easter that we actually allow our stocks to start reducing, and we start running the stock down a bit, because to buy salt in winter, it costs quite a bit more than it does in the summer. So during the winter season, we will buy as we need it and we'll keep filled up. During the back end of the season, we'll allow it to run down a bit and then we'll restock during the summer, so we're fully restocked. We've been doing this for the last 2 seasons at Ainley's, and say I bought 6,000 tonne during the winter last year, you know, we know what we're doing and we keep a real close eye on it. And I say all decision makers are looking at that every time they go out. So we've got real confidence that we've got an appropriate system to deal with it, and actually, we are gonna keep buying it, regardless if it costs more in the winter, and make sure there's plenty of that salt barn to keep doing the job we need to do every day.
Chair, if I could just come back briefly on that, I'll be very quick. Thank you, Jonathan. I understand that, and I'm encouraged by the confidence that you've exhibited in your reply. And I most definitely hope that you're right about everything. Let's be clear. But I just wanted to make a point that the old regime did involve 3 different locations for salts. And whilst they weren't ideal locations and they were open air and all of the technical problems arose that you described, they were very good in another sense, in that it gave some resilience about where the supplies are. In Calderdale, it's a very, very big, geographically large borough. So, you know, if there's local problems with access to Ainley Top, we've got all our eggs in one basket now, whereas in the past, we had 2 alternative supply depots that could help us. So I do think that needs to be brought into all of your calculations. Things have changed because there's not the resilience that we had before. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I fully understand what you're saying, and actually, you know, I would love to have more capacity, you know, for that strategic stock, but I think there needs to be a realism in the cost of this service, and actually, you know, we're trying to manage, and by having it in control in one location, it does give us real control on that salt and real sort of security around, you know, keeping a real eye on it. But yeah, we do hold a bit of stock out at home end still. We don't count that in any of our calculations, and we use that that's where we supply salt bins from. So we currently do have over 1,000 tonne on the floor at home end depot at Hebden Bridge, between Marlborough and Hebden Bridge, and that's used purely for salt bins. And that's something that we might carry on with going forward, because the salt in salt bins doesn't mind if it's been out in the rain a bit. So there is some hidden stock out there, but we don't rely on that. We calculate on what we've got in the salt barn, and that keep that as my extra bit of saving grace, if that makes sense.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for that, Jonathan. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Councillor Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I do really feel sorry for the department, because today you're dealing with rain coming down and the fear of flooding, and then tomorrow it might be completely different in relation to snowing conditions. So it's a very challenging period, and I do take my hats off to you. And of course, everyone expects their road to be cleared, and why isn't my road being cleared? So I think there's two things I want to raise. One is about effective communication, and I think it's homing down to people actually take note of the weather forecast. And if you can work from home, which frees up the network for those key workers that need to get to work and provide essential services. The other element I want to raise is about the local plan and about what contingencies you're putting in place for the additional housing in the future. This, in my view, would be an ideal opportunity to be speaking with the developer to get contributions for some equivalent to your salt bins, but where they're making a development to place their salt bin within a more a better build, shall we say, self-contained unit that actually would preserve the salt for the salt bins as well. So I'm very keen to know, because it's going to be a challenge in the future. It's going to be a bigger challenge in the future with all the additional houses planned. So those are my key two elements at this stage. And very much thank you for the report. I thought it was going to be quite dull actually, but it's more interesting than what I thought. So thank you.
Thanks, Howard. I don't know if either of you would like to respond.
I think I can possibly respond to that, Chair. So I think there were two questions related. I think one was in relation to the local plan and the garden villages, and we haven't done it yet. But like any new development and a new road that we're looking to adopt, that would be run through the infographic, the decision-making flowchart, which would dictate whether we were to provide a winter service or not, or salt bins or not. Related to that, your comment about ensuring we secured contributions, that is certainly something myself, Jonathan, and the corporate leads involved in managing the network are discussing, to ensure that we fully understand all the costs associated with a new length of network, whether that is the street lighting, the materials used to finish the highway or the footpath, whether that's the bins, whether that's green space. And we recognise that there is more work to do there for us to say this is the legitimate cost of the council taking on that section of highway and or providing that service. So that is something we are actively looking at to ensure that we get, hopefully, recognising there are limits around section 106s and other things, but that we get the funding that we need to provide the service that we need and want to provide.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Blackburn?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Adrian. That's really useful. I think it will be probably quite useful for a plan to come back to this scrutiny at some stage as to what it actually entails, what it looks like. So actually, as elected representatives, we can communicate that effectively to the people of where we represent. So yes, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Foster, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of footpaths. One's laying to bed a myth, I think. So a couple of questions. And the first one is about footpaths, and the rumour that goes around every year without fail that we don't grit the footpaths because if somebody fell over on them and we'd gritted them, we'd get sued, or some such nonsense along those lines. So can you please explain, other than cost, which is clearly an issue, what the rationale is behind the gritting of footpaths, and in particular things like routes to schools and so on, where you'd get heavy amounts of walking traffic and so on. The second question I've got is about the use of gritting in the summer. Now, I know this is less usual, but given that our summers are getting warmer and we're more likely to get extreme heat. And grit is used, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but grit is used to address melting roads when the heat gets too much. How does that affect the budget? And the third one is a question. Please, can all members have the infographics for the road gritting and salt bins, because it's really helpful to help us explain why Mrs. Jones's cul-de-sac isn't being gritted, or whatever the question is that we've been asked. So thank you very much, and I hope that made sense.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Yeah, you've touched upon one of my ears actually, but that's great. Yeah, gentlemen, who wants to pick up that one?
I'll start with the first question. We do not do any proactive salting of footways. We do some reactive salting of footways if we get into extreme conditions. So that's when we're expecting snow or ice to lie for several numbers of days. And I'm actually in a very fortunate position now. I actually run green spaces in the street scene, not just operational highways. I've actually got quite a lot more staff at my availability. I've got quite a few gardeners, for example. So what our plan is, and what we do is that we will, in very severe conditions, when it's going to carry on for a period of time, we will start with town centres first. So all the towns in Calderdale get the central areas treated. We then work out into routes around the hospital, around interchanges, transport interchanges, so bus stations, rail stations. And then we move out towards village centres. And when they go into village centres, so somewhere like Shelf, for example, they'd go up into Shelf, they do outside the shops, and outside maybe a doctor's surgery or something like that. And that's normally, by the time we get to that point, most of the time the weather's turning and we're and nature's taking its own course. If it carries on, we'll actually then gently widen that route out as necessary, and pick up on things like locations to schools and stuff like that. Now, one of the changes that when I was involved with the review back in 2017, one of the changes that we did at that time was we actually made sure that we provided gritting access or gritting services to all schools. And I think apart from 2 schools that are on really narrow cobbled lanes, all schools in Calderdale actually have a gritted road, gritted right up to them. So therefore, even if the path up to the school is not treated, there will be should be a safe route. And I know a lot of our gritter drivers have children that live in the localities where they work, and actually are very keen to make sure those routes are really safe. So that's what we cover with that. Some local authorities do proactive gritting of footways. Certainly some of the bigger cities do. Talking to them, it is a very expensive task and very labour intensive. We wouldn't just be looking at a few £1,000s here. We'd be looking at considerable amounts of money, because if you started doing it proactively, you'd have to treat more like you do with road gritting, where you actually go out on a lot more regular basis. So that was that question. The thing about roads and gritting roads in the summer, we have to occasionally, when we do that, we actually have a contractor. We have one contractor who is on call that is on call for dealing diesel spills, because we actually grit diesel spills using granite dust. And actually, if we get melting roads, we actually treat them with granite dust as well. So we do actually have a gritter on call 24/7 all year round for diesel spills, and we actually use that gritter for doing melted roads. And yes, some summers we are seeing an increased amount of that activity needing to happen. That doesn't come out of the winter services budget. That just comes out of general highway maintenance budgets, and means that something else doesn't get done. So,
right.
There's no real policy around how we deal with that. It's a reactive service, like most of what I deal with is a reactive, and we just we'll go and assess a problem and actually then deal with it appropriately as needed. Sometimes it's localized treatment by just hand gang or manual gritting. And if you could just repeat what your last question was, Councillor Foster.
Just about sending the infographics out. And is there any about the whole suing if people fall on gritted footpaths thing?
No, that's a complete misnomer. This is something that actually it gained some wind a few years ago when people were trying to do quite a lot of self-help. You'd get neighbours on the street trying to work together and clear things. And there was some people put out some very bad information that suggested that if you cleared the footpath and somebody fell over, it was your responsibility. That's completely not true, because you're acting as a good Samaritan trying to do your best. And this is one of the things that, and I think one of the reasons that we would have to consider, if we did go proactive around footpath gritting, we would have to talk to our insurance companies about how we'd have to phase that and do that. And, we'd have to come up with some real quite strict policies about what we did and what we didn't do and things like that to protect the council.
Thank you. Great stuff. Yeah, these are the sort of things that are good to know, actually, because it comes into our inbox very regularly, as I'm sure we can all agree. Thank you. Councillor Holdsworth, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And just a couple of questions, please. We're often compared very favourably with neighbouring authorities like Kirklees in terms of the way that we clear our roads. I wanted to ask you, the 1.4 million that may be slightly more or slightly less at the moment, given fuel consumption, I'm presuming this includes the salaries of staff who are employed by Calderdale. But if it's a really bad winter, the 17 farmers with their tractors and their gritters, presumably the more they go out, the more that costs, because they must be paid completely separately. Is that right?
Yeah, so the council there's only 10 members of Calderdale Council that are actually employed on the service. That's 4 decision makers and 6 supervisors. We get a fixed payment for the privilege of doing this duty, regardless of how much we turn out. So that's a relatively fixed cost. All other costs are via contractors. So all the gritters are provided by contractors and all the snowplows by contractors. So if we do 40 turnouts a year, it will cost X. If we did 80 turnouts, it would be 2X. Just to put things into sort of, I suppose, give you some suggested numbers, and these really can vary, but a severe snow day, you could spend in excess of 100k on a severe snow day.
Interesting. So given that they're all contractors, how does that work, say, with a neighbouring authority like Kirklees having an equally awful snow day? Who gets priority, first dibs at the contractors and their equipment? So
we retain, our gritting contractors are paid standby, so they're actually paid to be available for Calderdale 24/7, and that requires them to have an attendance time of 1 hour. The tractor plough contractors, we hold them on a retainer, so we actually pay them a nominal fee. Off the top of my head, I think it's about £400 a year. These are all people that are solely on retainer to us. And that's why actually, when I say, some people say, well, you actually could have more than that. Well, actually, no, we've got a group of contractors that have priced and tendered for the work, and they're actually trusted by the authority to be reliable and turn out when we need them to turn out. So that's why we've got that pool of resources, and we're very happy that we've got it.
Thank you. The second question I've got is this. In Greetland and Stainland, we've got quite a lot of unadopted roads, and every winter there are a lot of complaints from residents on these unadopted roads who say, well, we pay our council tax. Why haven't we got grit bins? Why aren't our roads cleared? And it's quite hard to answer that. I mean, I do understand the council has no responsibility for these roads, but what would you advise as being the best reply politely to say to these constituents?
And I think this, I've had this quite a few times. I've had conversations over the years while I've been at Calderdale with people, and the way I explain it is that actually a council tax. So like I was talking to a couple once who had no children, and I said, well, actually, part of your council tax pays for schools, but you've not used that service. And I think it's that approach that council tax is for providing for the greater good of all the people in Calderdale. And actually, what's an interesting thing and it's a thought that we, regularly bring up with people, is that actually a lot of the people that use the roads in Calderdale actually don't pay Calderdale council tax. They're actually people that are passing through the borough. And it's the same that when we, if we travel to North Yorkshire or to the Whitby to go to the coast, our council tax doesn't pay for emptying that chip wrapper we put in the bin there or for providing that car park. And I think it's that approach, and it's an awkward one on adopted roads, but it's that standard thing that if a road's adopted, it's maintainable at the council expense. If it's not adopted, it's not maintainable at the council expense. And that's a decision that somebody in the past took. We've even got we had housing estates recently where they've not taken on adoptions because they decided they didn't want to spend the money on bringing the road to that required standard. And unfortunately, the people who live there will not receive some of the services that other people do receive. And it's one of the things. Now, obviously, if there was an emergency or blue light response, we don't look at whether it's adopted or not. We attend and we do what needs to be done. And actually, the rule book goes out the window on those days and we just do what needs to be done. So in those awkward situations, the service is unilateral and it's based on what is important at that point in time.
Thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we had a conversation fairly recently that unadopted roads meant that you paid less council tax back in the day, but obviously that's been a long time gone. But that's we'll save that one for another time, perhaps. Councillor Lynn, good evening, welcome. You've got your hand raised. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. And I thought I was probably going to be the last one, but I think Councillor Kearney is going to come in after me. Well, I just wanted to say I hope you've all enjoyed the presentations from Adrian and from Jonathan, and I think you can see why I'm immensely proud of the work that they do. They know the job, they know what needs doing, and they do it very, very well. And they really care about Calderdale. So I just wanted to put that on record. I'm really, really proud of them. In terms of and some good questions tonight, actually. And I have to say, starting with Councillor Lee's question, I mean, I was delighted to have a chance to go up to have a look at the salt barn when it was just at the point of being finished and everything, and was really, really impressed with it. And I think it has made. I really think it has made a big difference. And in fact, in a way, it's just part and parcel of what's gone on in terms of inflation. That as Adrian mentioned in his remarks, the inflation costs in terms of fuel and diesel and everything. We all know what's happened to that in the last 2 or 3 years has started to eat away what should have been the kind of overall savings. But the fact is, 1.4 million was what we were budgeting about 5 or 6 years ago, and 1.4 million is still what we're budgeting, and we're doing our best to try to keep within it. So I also think it's really important, and I think Jonathan and Adrian are very conscious of this, that we could do more. We'd like to do more. It'd be great if we could have enough staff to get out and grit all the pavements, but we can't because there's other demands on the council resources. But I would also say that, in the same way that Jonathan deals with this quite a lot, in the same way that we're very encouraging, and we've got Amy Powell-Bevan who works with volunteers, we're very keen to encourage people to be prepared to say, we'll regularly do a litter pick around our streets or around our neighbourhood because we just want to keep it looking nice. So I think I was really grateful to Councillor Foster's question that said, oh dear, don't anybody, what happens if you do actually try to clear a pavement or you try to clear your road and then somebody slips and everything. I live on an unadopted road. And like other people, sometimes I will, if it's really snowy, I'll get my shovel out and you clear the snow off your steps, so that and off your footpath, so that the postie can get up and all the rest of it. And we all do that. And I think, in a way, when we're in situations where we are perhaps on unadopted streets or whatever, those of us that are fit enough to do it need to be prepared to get out with our shovels and help our neighbours who might not be able to do it. So that was that. The only final thing I wanted to say is that, many years ago, I mean, I think I'm right in saying that Calderdale employed, a big national contractor to do a lot of this sort of stuff. And we decided to move away from that, fairly recent, a few years ago, because I think it was felt that we really could get a better service by relying on local people, local contractors, local businesses, local farmers. And I know that one of the things when I talked to some of the people in Jonathan's team when I was up at Ainley Top a while ago, talking about how all this works, was that actually it's great because you've got established, you end up having established relationships with the local people, local farmers and so on, who can be called out very quickly, and who aren't having to drive from a depot in Doncaster or whatever it is to get there. So it's good for the climate. The money that we spend is going back into our local economy in Calderdale, into local farmers, local contractors. So I hope very much, and I was very pleased to hear Councillor Holsworth say that what we do is, sometimes we're compared quite favourably with some of our surrounding authorities, and I hope what you've heard tonight has reassured you as to why that is. Hopefully that's the case now, and I hope it will continue to be the case for many years to come. That's it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenny. Yeah, that bit about the local reinvesting into smaller local operations. It's in a lot of ways that's music to my ears, especially if it makes it economic, and not to mention the environmental impact as well. As you say, rather than having come from some centralised depot elsewhere. Yes, it won't just be Councillor Kearney, I suspect, unless he's unless he's read my mind. But yeah, so Councillor Kearney, if you want to ask your questions or make your point, that'd be great.
Thanks, Chair. It was just I'd found a link to the PDF of the grid infographic, the one that was in the pack, it was like a kind of screenshot of it. But it just I noticed like the salt, because I was wondering what a salt pile was, and it looks as though it is just a pile of salt. And the officer that was talking about it, I think it was Jonathan, said that if it rains, it can get washed away and stuff. Is there anything done to sort of like mitigate that? Pinning a tarpaulin over it or something like that, because you could, I don't know how many piles there are and how much money could effectively get washed away, but is there anything like that goes on?
So just salt piles, we only use them in really rural areas. We, over the years, where we've found we've had real problems with wash away, we've actually been installing
Oh, we've sort of lost you, Mike. Jonathan, sorry.
Yeah, his connection was
struggling
there. Oh, he's back.
Am I back? Sorry about that.
Yep, you're back.
The microwave got turned on at home, and that must have upset the internet. I'm just saying that salt piles, yes, there is a problem with them getting washed away. But what salt piles allow us to do in some really rural areas is provide, especially on steep hills, several locations of salt, small areas of salt, that just to help small numbers of properties that are needed. What we have done over the years, where we've had particular problems with it, is to create raised areas just on the verges and things like that to actually stop the salt from getting affected by water. And it's only when we get into extremely wet weather it gets sort of really affected. Salt has a natural ability to actually what's called thatch, and that's where you get, if you see a pile at the side of the road, sometimes it's very dark brown. It's actually created a protective layer on the top of it, and actually underneath that the salt will still be very good. So it's just financially putting a lot of salt bins out in those locations wouldn't be beneficial, but also on some of our really rural environments, I think putting a lot of yellow salt bins wouldn't actually be very good for sort of environmental impact, as in the view and things like that. And it's managed successfully. It's just that we need to be very aware. Like, for example, with the weather we've got tomorrow, I would not have been putting salt piles out today. I would leave it and do it next week. And it's just to that effect.
Great stuff. Thank you. Right then, my turn, and I'm sort of starting off at the bottom of the heap, as it were. I was just wondering, because it is a regular one for my inbox as well, in terms of what is the criteria that qualifies, because for residents or a street to receive a salt bin, because yeah, I mean, the question does come in. The justification is issued as to why they feel they should have one, but I'm just wondering if there is a decision tree that decides whether a street gets a salt bin or not.
Yeah, there's actually a scoring matrix chart. I'll tomorrow I'll share with Mike Lodge a copy of that scoring chart. I'll get and allow him to circulate it out to everybody. It basically looks at number of properties, distance from either a gritted route or another salt bin, elevation and steepness of the road, and then special factors. And for example, a known location where there's always water runs across the road would score points on that basis, let alone before it scored other things. So I'll share tomorrow with Mike Lodge the thing, and I need to send it round to you all so you can see it.
Right, lovely. Yeah, that would be useful actually.
What we do, Council, now is any requests we get, we actually do. It gets scored on the sheet, and we actually send those sheets out back to the councillors on any requests we receive now.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. That's good to know. The second question I have really is in reaction to someone I saw just the other day already raiding the salt bin for their own, I presume, driveway or footpath outside their house. I thought, well, he started early. Now, I'm just wondering if we need a little bit of some kind of campaign that basically says that this salt is not for your driveway. It might be as simple as maybe sticking a label on the bins. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, how much would you say that sort of, well, pilfering is a bit of a nuisance for us as a council?
It tends to be isolated locations, and actually it can get to the extent of the entire salt bin being stolen. So we have seen the entire thing being tipped on the floor and loaded onto trailers and taken away. What we tend to find is on residential streets, the people on the street themselves police that quite well. But then there is certain areas where we've had calls about the salt bins empty, and we've got there and every drive's covered in brown salt and the road's still white. And it's just one of those things that, and whether it's something me and Adrian discuss, and when we get into some more of that type of weather, we actually talk with comms about doing a bit of a thing about it, make sure the resources are shared out amongst everybody that's there to be using it, sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was a bit rich considering this bloke was driving a 4x4. I thought that was a little bit beyond the pale. Before I bring in Councillor Lee, who's got his hand raised, my final question for yourselves really was, how was last winter? I know we did have some snow. How did last winter fit into the modelling that you've done? Did we come in at approximately at about budget more than anything else, and salt demand?
Oh, I don't know. Jonathan's frozen or waiting for me to come in, but I think we're quite fortunate last year. I think going into the winter, or certainly early part of the winter, we were forecasting an overspend, which initially needs to be managed within the service, which unfortunately means we probably need to rein back on other activities, which again are under pressure, but we can reduce some of our other services to sort of safety critical. We touched on, though, that there are years where what we need to do in terms of winter service just exceeds the ability for us to manage within our current budgets, and that's when we would obviously have a conversation with colleagues in finance and the sort of corporate centre in terms of what contingencies could be released to manage that pressure. Last year we came in, I think, I can't remember, it's just over or just under budget, because actually we were then very lucky after Christmas with what happened. I think as I learn more about winter service coming into this role, Jonathan's sort of explained that snow is probably the thing that costs us the most money in terms of dealing with. But actually then it doesn't necessarily correlate to cold weather costs more, because actually sometimes wet weather hovering in and around zero can also cost a lot because the salt washes away, so we need to redo the routes. So sadly, talking about a mild winter doesn't necessarily correlate to less activity and therefore a sort of cheap, a lesser cost. Obviously, if it's really mild and we don't need to go out at all, that's great. But some of the winters we've seen where it's hovering around 0, but then it can thaw and refreeze the next day, and you've got icy conditions, requires multiple runs, which is where, again, real cost runs in.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, well, I wish you good fortune for this winter, of course. Now, just when we thought it was safe to get back into the salt bin, we've got another further flurry of activity. So we've got Councillor Lee and then Councillor Foster. So Councillor Lee first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just thinking, it's been fascinating and very well done, Adrian and Jonathan. I feel inspired with confidence. But Councillor Lynn made a very important point that, you know, the budget has been kept where it is in recent years. But in recent years, we've had some good luck, as Adrian's just said. And I do think, for the sake of the officers and the sake of all parties, it might be useful to just run the numbers based on the average 12,000 tonnes, which has been used for years, the average usage that was accepted a few years ago. With the fuel costs, salt costs, contractors' costs, these are all new costs, new things that we're doing to do it differently, to do it more effectively. And for me, it would be very useful if we could rerun the numbers based on 12,000 tonnes usage to see what it would come out if that were, in fact, the outcome for a given year, because that will help all of us when it comes to the budget process. So that, and I'm looking at Councillor Lynn here, so that none of us are faced with, you know, up and down budgets according to old assumptions. So I think that would be very useful, Adrian, if that would be possible. Shouldn't be difficult. Thank you.
I think if I just come back on that, I think I understand the question, but what we've actually done is run the actuals for the last 5 years. So when we look at the actuals, what we've actually spent on the winter service for the last 5 years, the average of that is approximately 1.4, albeit some years I think went as high as, I think, 2.9 million. We've then, though, because that's obviously not taking account of inflation, we have adjusted the last 5 years for today's prices. And that's what then gives us an average for the last 5 years of between 1.5 and 1.6 million. But again, there is a lot of variance, and something I'm keen to sort of discuss further with finance colleagues is how we can take a bit of that uncertainty out of it. So clearly it would be great to start the year with a budget line which reflects what we think the service will cost in any given year. I don't want to profiteer from that if we have a, you know, if we have a fortunate year, but at the same time it's very difficult to manage that if we have a particularly bad year. So obviously that, you know, but I'm not alone in having a budget line which is difficult to manage, and has factors that perhaps outside of your control, or a number of factors outside of your control. So those are conversations that are taking place at the moment. The budget line we have, you know, I guess what I would say is we know what it is. We forecast appropriately, we take action appropriately to manage the overall cost of the service, and I mean that not just the winter service but the highway service within that budget. But if we start to feel that's going beyond our ability to manage, again, we have very early conversations with finance for what that might mean.
Thank you. I think that covers it for you, Stephen. So, Councillor Foster, last roll of the dice, I suppose, unless anyone else
anybody else jumps in. Thank you. It's another myth-busting question. One of the things we often get moaned at is during snowfall, but you haven't gritted the roads because basically you've been out gritted and then the snow's fallen and it's covered it all. So really, it's kind of a what can we do to get the message out that it's really fairly pointless trying to grit roads if you don't also plough them during heavy snow, because the grit will just be ineffective. And actually, can you explain a bit more about the what actually happens rather than my sort of assumptions and probably garbled nonsense around that? Yeah, so really myth busting about gritting during active snowfall, and how do we address the people that moan about it, because inevitably they do, mostly on Facebook. Thank you.
Yeah, what we do when we've got if conditions are dry and we've got a forecast of a snow forecast, so a snow only forecast, not a mixed precipitation type forecast, is we spread a layer of salt on the roads, and that salt we're putting down is purely there to act as a debonding layer. So that's there to actually make it, when we actually get round to ploughing it, means that there's actually a layer of the snow doesn't get frozen into the road. There's actually this little layer of that's providing a sort of stop breaking it, because you'll all know on your paths at home, if snow ever freezes on your path, you feel like you need to get the hammer and chisel out to get it off sometimes, don't you? And we put this debonding layer on. Depending on the conditions, depends on how we then carry on with our treatment. That's why I explained about the hierarchies, because if it's blowing a hoolie and actually it's drifting in constantly, I'm actually just going to leave that road and let it drift in, because actually I could battle it all night with a load of plants and actually make no difference at all. Whereas actually, if I put that plant into the areas that are critical, so that means doubling up on main roads and things like that. So one of the duties that we have is that Burnley Road and Rochdale Road at Todmorden, and then out towards Chain Bar, is actually the only strategic low-level diversion route for the entire of the Northern England. It's the only low-level route across the Pennines from basically Scotland down to Derby. So when we get these severe conditions, we might put a lot more gritters onto that piece of road, because actually we've got a sort of duty to maintain for UK PLC that clear sort of network, to provide that connectivity across the country. So there might be roads that don't see a gritter for several hours, because actually we're prioritising other areas. But we will be back. People just need to wait, and we will come back. We're not forgetting you. It just means that we've got to actually prioritise. It's also the fact that as soon as we start putting ploughs on vehicles, when a gritter goes down a road, he can do both sides of the road at the same time when he's salting. As soon as he puts a plough on, he's going to have to go up down. He's going to have to go at least up one way and back down the other side. If the road's of any significant width, he's likely to have to go up twice one side and twice the other side. So actually, a route that would normally take him 3 hours to get round suddenly doubles to 6 to 8 hours to get round, once. And that's why we get this sort of unbelief that actually we're not there doing it. And it's just the fact that actually we are out there doing it, but we're prioritizing the sort of what is needed. And actually, with all, Ellen bypasses, for example, is a classic example. I will put all resources I need to keep that clear, because actually that's the road that links the two main hospitals in our area together. If you've had an accident and you've broken your leg, you go into Kirklees to Huddersfield General. Therefore, we prioritise things like that, and this is where, as officers, we just have to make some quite hard decisions. And actually, some roads do get left for a while, but we are going to come back and we will get to it. But we've just got to make those sort of calls. And it is very hard on those nights. It is really hard. And what we actually did this year, when we only had one real severe snow day this year, we actually the decision maker who was on call at night actually worked the entire night out at the depot and was actually making those strategic calls at officer level rather than sort of supervisor level, so that actually we were really prioritising and putting the council's book where it actually needs to be spent. Because you can drive around all day throwing salt on snow, as you say, Councillor Foster, and actually all it'll do is melt a little hole through it and actually won't do anything. So therefore, it's far better to wait till we get a plough there and get it scraped off and then put some salt down.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Jonathan, Adrian, thank you both very much indeed. This is one of our success stories, in my opinion, and it's one that I've listened to a few times over the few years that I've been a councillor, and it's one that genuinely reassures. So I'd like to thank you both for your attendance this evening, for the report. Thank you for that. and for your input this evening, which has been really helpful, really informative, and really sort of showcases the great work that you do. And I genuinely appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. And I think that reflects the rest of the board as well. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the next part of the agenda, which is our work program. So yeah, if you want to call it quits, Adrian and John, yeah, you're welcome to say cheery bye, and we'll see you again. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, great stuff. So to the work program, Mike, Libby, Mike.
Libby, I think, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. There's not too much to say, to be honest. I think the only thing that's probably worth pointing out at this point is, following the detailed review that Scrutiny did earlier this year into domestic abuse, the recommendation that domestic abuse as an area sits in one directorate, following the Cabinet report, that's been incorporated and is now sitting in public services. So any sort of future items relating to domestic abuse would come to this board now. And I think it's just worth suggesting that we get something on the work programme about a formal response to each recommendation made in the report from the relevant cabinet member, which would now be Councillor Lynn.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do we have a time frame suggested for this?
I think looking at the work programme as it stands, it'd probably be March.
Okay. If everyone's content with that. What else have we got on the sorry, let me pull up the work program now on the agenda.
It would probably March. We could look at sitting as the Crime and Disorder Board and moving that from February, so having the work that you're leading on with knife crime
as well
into that. It might need a little bit of editing because of previous plans that we had for March. We'd have to speak to other colleagues.
Yes. February, March, bereavement services is the only item at the moment really on that. So it's, yeah, we've got scope to be able to put it on there, haven't we? Long story short.
We do, yeah.
Right. Yes, because theoretically we're sitting as the Crime and Disorder Board in February, aren't we?
We are at the moment. I think just after conversations that we've had with the working group for knife crime, we were a bit worried about the timescales there, so maybe moving it back a month. But as I say, with bereavement services, there were sort of plans in place, so we would have to have a look at making sure that that can be moved and works for the officers involved.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we can swing it. It looks like it's doable at the moment. So yeah, I'm assuming that other members are content with that. Oh, Mike, sorry.
So I was just going to come in with something else, actually, Chair. We moved the inclusive economic strategy from this meeting at the Sheila O'Neill's request and Kate McNicola's request, because November fitted better with where they were in their work. That left us 3 hefty items in November, so we're suggesting moving is it the highways item, Libby?
It is, yeah. I've sent an email out earlier today explaining that it'll be the highways item moving, just because biodiversity and inclusive economy seem a little bit more time sensitive.
The other thing that I haven't discussed with Libby, and I just thought I ought to take the opportunity, is that we've got the ongoing bit of work we're preparing for on housing, and Councillor Clark has been working on that, but she's not been well. So I just wondered whether, Councillor Dickinson, we might see whether anybody wanted to volunteer to work alongside Councillor Clark with me and Libby on housing issues, so that we don't sort of lose any more momentum on it. And people, if anybody's willing to do that and wants to email Libby or me, then we can sort that out, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, not having all the members of the board here this evening, I think, yeah, that would be wise. See if we can find ourselves a volunteer for that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Mike.
And the other thing just to mention, Chair, is to take on board the comments before we started the meeting about members who had to get from the town hall to home in order to participate, or in Councillor Kearney's case, go from home to the town hall to participate. We'll have discussions about whether we can do things to keep the town hall open when that happens, or to react to those situations when they arise. We'll talk about that outside the meeting.
Yeah, overall, I would suggest it's a relatively rare and unusual occurrence, but yeah, it is something that needs addressing because you know, as it's shaping up at the moment, Stuart it's starting a bit like a Caravaggio, which is not bad actually. So 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 I hope we managed to turn the lights back on for you, Stuart. But yeah, so it's clearly something that needs addressing, but it is a relatively unusual occurrence, I suggest. But yeah, definitely want to think about. Good. Okay, in that case, unless anybody else has anything that they wish to offer, I think we can call it a day there. Great. 7:25, more or less. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your attendance, and hope it's been an interesting one for you. I mean, yeah, it's a good one, and it's something to be proud of, definitely. Thank you very much indeed. Have a good evening.
Lovely. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.